Of the 113 podcast episodes I've published so far, the one which still seemed to generate the most chatter is this one. Published in April of 2022, it's an episode on DAWs where I gave my take on which one is the best. And while some folks who left comments seem to kind of miss the whole point, which was find the DAW that works best for you, it still proves that clearly there isn't one fit for all people, which is why on today's show, I welcome producer, composer, and educator Christina Horn, who not only works in production music for Warner Brothers Discovery, she's also a certified Ableton Live guru, and she talks about how she uses the non-linear and expansive capabilities of Live to unlock her creativity, and also how she relishes in breaking through stereotypes, like how Live is just for EDM, or how there are no women who are kick-ass producers. Plus, we listen through the latest submission in my year of taxi, follow up on any returns or forwards, and I provide feedback on a cue written by a member of the 52 Cues community on this week's episode of the 52 Cues podcast. What is happening, everybody? This is Dave Croft, and welcome back to another episode of the 52 Cues podcast, a weekly podcast dedicated to all things production and library music, where we talk about industry topics and take a deep dive into the different aspects of being a working production music composer. Plus, in my Year of Taxi update, we're going to check in on any returns or forwards and take a listen to this week's submission, which is an epic orchestral hip-hop cue. And then a little later on, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on a hybrid action trailer cue written by a member of the 52 Cues community, Marc Alan, so you definitely want to stick around for that. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm so glad you found me however you found me. I know you have a ton of options out there, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the audio podcast on the go. I just want to thank you, for spending part of your day here with me. I also want to give a special word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52 Cues who help keep the podcast, the channel, and everything we do here going. We are 100% community supported, so if you like what I do here, don't thank me, thank them. But if you want to learn more about how you can help support 52 Cues and also unlock perks like live streams, workshops, Zoom feedback sessions, and a ton more, then be sure to click on the links in the description or stick around, because we're going to be talking more about that a little bit later in today's episode. So let's check in on my year of taxi. As you know, last week I submitted a cue, sentimental piano cue, which was admittedly a little out of my comfort zone, and sadly, I think the screeners agreed. So it will go into the return pile. They didn't dig it. And so the feedback was that what I like most about the song, they said, I think we have the right tone and this is a good start for the listing. I like the minimal intrusion. Totally on the right track for under dialogue, but I think we could improve the song by, there's not much forward motion from 0 to 43 seconds, so I'd either do some consolidating, shorten the intro, or add some variation there. We can also consider having some kind of melody for this cue, and again, it would be better to have this a bit shorter overall, perhaps closer to 130. Yeah, it was about 144 and some change. Goes on to say, and while it sounds like you might have worked hard to add humanity to your piano, it still falls a little short of capturing the emotion coming from your fingertips. And I've speculated before that I think the screeners watch the podcast. And if you do, hello screeners, hi taxi folks, hope you're doing well. Just know that I'm trusting in the system, and I'm pretty positive that I'm getting a fair shake here. But yeah, this sounds like a comment directly based off of what I had said in last week's episode, where I mentioned how hard I worked on making sure this sounded like a human. If not, maybe not. Maybe it's just coincidental. But now this is kind of the second time in a row that a return yielded notes specifically that were either in the comments or that I had mentioned. So anyway, I'm not saying that had any bearing on the situation, but seem to address some of the things that I put forward as a strength. And so anyway, goes on to say, I returned or forwarded this song because composition could evolve more in the first 43 seconds. 43 to 122 is okay, but more variation on the melody would help there. And coming down at the end is okay, but the playing and arrangement could be more firm, solidified, and less repetitive overall. So what's the takeaway here? Well, I was admittedly out of my comfort zone with this one, and I didn't feel super great. I'm not a pianist, but looking at some of the forwards and the forward blog that Taxi puts out, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you want to hear things that get forwarded, which are, like staggeringly amazing and more amazing than yours. But it can be really frustrating when you hear things that were forwarded, especially if you think, were they forwarded by a different screener or whatever, which are arguably kind of on the line or kind of on the bubble. And it just makes you it just proves that no matter how far up this path you go, there's that kind of self-doubt and that little moment. And when I got this return, it's not like it just went, oh, no big deal. It kind of stuck on me for a little bit, which I think is how any creative endeavor. I still work towards shutting down that the emotion behind it, because you do want it to be successful. But that forwards blog can be kind of a double-edged sword. And I've heard from some other listings that were posted, and the students got their return. And listening to the forwards blog, the comments that were made on their return were pretty inconsistent from things that did get forwarded. And so it can be a real source of frustration. So I'm looking forward. I don't know if I've announced this on the show, but once I get about halfway through, so we're looking somewhere in the summer or so, I am going to have the Taxi head screener come on the show. And we're going to do an interview with the head screener to talk about the whole screening process and everything. But like I said, I believe in the system. I believe that everybody's getting a fair share, and we'll figure out kind of where some of the inconsistencies come and the intangible. If it's just like an intangible kind of je ne sais quoi of why this gets forwarded and this doesn't, I kind of get that. But it can be frustrating when you see somebody get a return on something that this was returned because, for example, this one was about atmosphere. It was for this atmospheric emotional piano. And they said it didn't have enough atmosphere. And my interpretation of that was it didn't have enough like reverb and space and that kind of thing. But listening to things that got forwarded didn't have those qualities as well. And I understand that when we're in the realm of abstract vibe, mood, terms like atmosphere, and how you translate that to musical actionable items, then there's vagueness that gets introduced, and it can be really frustrating just to kind of quantify that to somebody who is trying to get better and try to learn. But I'm going to have the head screener in the summer, in a few months, and we're going to hopefully get to the bottom of that. So sadly, like I said, it looks like you can always come home. We'll find another home, probably on Spotify. I'm just going to go release it on Spotify. Why not? And sit on it. And if I get another chance to post another listing for a piano, I don't know. I think maybe I stay out of this lane. The same reason I wouldn't do like a solo guitar. I'm just not a pianist. Now, what I could have done is collaborated with someone. I haven't really talked about that. I don't even know if I'm doing any collaborations on my year of Taxi, but we'll find out. We'll find out. So this week, however, I am writing something that I am very, very intimately familiar with, which is epic hip hop instrumentals. And so now is the time where I say something which qualifies my submission, and we'll see if the screener follows up. But yeah, I do a ton of this. I do a ton of this stuff specifically for CBS Sports. And so I wrote something that I know gets air. You know, you can go on my IMDb listening if you want, maybe screener, you could check that out. But I wrote something that I felt pretty good about. I feel as good about this type of these types of cues as I do the tension cues, but they're wanting epic hip-hop instrumentals for sports. And so they're looking for mid to up-tempo instrumentals, and then the playlist. And so this were instrumentals only, so no vocals. Goes on to say, please submit well-produced hip-hop instrumentals bursting with epic, driving, anthemic energy that could get any sports fan pumped up. Your submission should have driving beats, catchy motifs, and engaging instrumentation in the general wheelhouse of the references. And so the references, there was one from the Creed soundtrack, another one which was kind of big and stringy and kind of orchestral, and the third one, which was a little bit more contemporary with like 808s and that kind of thing. But the two that I gravitated towards were these big orchestral type sounds. A polished production, high quality virtual sounds or samples, and contemporary hip hop arrangements with plenty of dynamics, interest, and forward motion are needed as well. Submission should be 90 seconds to 2 minutes long, give or take, non-faded button stinger ending. So the cue that I wrote is called Knockout Round. And I leaned into not only what I know to do, but one of the references specifically was from the movie Creed. And so I kind of pushed into that direction, making sure that I didn't just model one reference. But here, this one's called Knockout Round. So that was Knockout Round. It's pretty much the same type of cue that I've written hundreds and hundreds of times so far, and with the layering and building, and then into a breakdown section, and all of those types of things. And we'll see if that's going to work. Now, I will say I've submitted to one of these sports type searches before, and have been absolutely turned away. And so I just kind of took my football and went home on that one. Actually, I ended up giving that to my CBS publisher, and I believe it made air. So different libraries are looking for different things. So we'll see. We'll see if they like Knockout Round. But what do you think? Do you think this is a forward, or do you think this is a return? Let me know. We're kind of keeping score so far. I am 3 for 2. 3 for 2 in 2023, and that is that's my year of taxi check-in. So Ableton Live was my first real kind of like grown-up DAW. You know, I kind of learned in using Acid Pro and Fruity Loops back before it was FL Studio. And I even used Reason, but at the time, Reason was very much in the box. You couldn't record into it. And so the first kind of real grown-up DAW that I got into, it wasn't Pro Tools, it wasn't, Cubase, it wasn't Logic, it was Ableton Live. And was admittedly kind of my first love. I still use Ableton to this day, but as I've pushed into my work in Logic, just because of my time at Full Sail, that Ableton muscle has kind of atrophied a little bit. But when I met Christina, who I know uses Ableton, and not only uses it, but is a certified Ableton trainer, which means she knows practically everything there is to know about Ableton Live, and she uses it for production music, I knew I had to talk to her and I had to bring her on the podcast. So here is my recent conversation with Christina Horn. I am so excited to be joined by the one, the only certified Ableton trainer and certified, do they make a certification for badass? Because you would be a certified badass. Christina Horn, welcome to the channel.
Hey, thanks for having me. That's a great intro.
Yeah, well, it's well deserved, and I was so excited, when we met through a mutual friend, and my first DAW love was Ableton Live.
No way.
It's I started learning it way back. I mean, wow, it's probably been 15, 16 years or longer now. And coming to Full Sail in Florida, they kind of pushed me into Logic direction just because that's what I teach every single day. But there's always been a real soft spot in my heart for Ableton. And I know that you've been incredibly successful with Ableton, and there's always a part of me, like the one that got away, what if, Ableton, and not that this is all about Ableton, but you've been very successful using Ableton. You've talked about how it's kind of unlocked your creativity. We even have a workshop on unlocking creativity coming up here soon at 52 Qs. But before we get into all of that, I just want to welcome you to the channel and say thank you so much for joining me.
I'm so happy to be here. I think I've listened to all of your episodes. I'm a little behind because part of what I do is work on podcasts myself, so it's a lot of listening. But I do love your podcast. It's so informative.
Knowing how much podcasting you do and how much podcast production, that is very high praise. I really, really appreciate it. I work so hard in making sure that it sounds like. Actually, I want it to sound like radio. And do you find that, don't mind us listeners, we're just going to sidetrack here when we're talking about podcasting.
Yeah, it does. It comes from radio. And the only difference is it's on demand, which is so amazing because, you can listen to it on your walk. I love to listen while I'm folding laundry and doing other chores that are completely mind numbing because then I don't feel like I'm wasting my life folding laundry. So,
podcast and my morning bike ride, as well as grocery shopping. Podcasting does really, I find I can't listen to audiobooks while grocery shopping because I just kind of tune out, because I'm like reading, the prices and all that stuff. But listening to podcasts works really, really well. But anyway, this isn't a show about podcasting. This is a show about you. And I just want you to tell us a little bit about your journey, what drew you to Ableton Live, what drew you to being a musician, a composer, and an artist. Just tell us about yourself.
Well, it's always weird to have to talk about yourself, but I'm thinking about what you said about being drawn to a DAW when you first started working in production music or music in general. And I think most people are drawn to a DAW because they're like, I want to compose or I want to produce a track that's linear for a song. It's 3 minutes long, right? And it has a start, a middle, and an end. I got into Ableton Live as a tool to perform live on stage. That eventually led me to think, oh my God, I actually love spending time tweaking sounds and turning knobs and playing with technology so much that I think I prefer the studio. So it actually led me to that part in my life. But I did come from a very traditional like music background with, lessons when I was a kid. I played trumpet in the band, and which is a very lonely instrument, which led me to piano, which is a very difficult instrument. So of course, that's what I stuck with. It's the problem solving, right? Because composing, I think, is a lot of just problem solving. And obviously, working in a DAW, 99% of the time you're like, why can't I hear anything? Or, you're fixing something that's not working the way that you want it to. So it was a very natural progression. And when I started touring as a musician, playing keyboards in bands, I was hauling around all these giant Kurzweils and like Hammond organs and just like a truckload of keyboards. And I was like, I can't do this anymore after several years. And at that point, I'd become pretty proficient in Ableton Live and was able to create all my own keyboard patches essentially, and just bring one tiny MIDI controller, which is totally busted up right now and hanging on the wall.
It's art.
It's like a relic.
It's art, right? Yeah.
It's survived the road. Like all the knobs and faders are busted off, whatever. But it allowed me to expand my sound palette. And then from there, I realized that it was, as a compositional tool, it allowed me to take, I have a grand piano behind me here. This is where I started. And I ran out of sounds that I could make on the grand piano. Right. It's like I did a lot of contemporary music in school. And one composer that I performed was Tanya Leon. She's an Afro-Cuban composer. And her piece started with, holding down a string in the piano in just the right way, and then lifting the damper pedal so it would resonate, and then trying to make it thump, right? And then resonate. And then you would play some big crazy chord on top of that. So I noticed that contemporary composers were also trying to figure out a way to like expand their sound palette. And that's what really kind of led me to using Ableton Live in a more creative way. I was like, okay, this is like a new box of crayons, whereas I really just had charcoal before. So that's kind of how I got there. That's a very shortened story.
Yeah, there's only so many, forks and toothpicks and chopsticks you could stick into a piano before you realize.
There's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. John Cage made a whole thing of it.
He did it though. It's like done. It's been done.
That's right. So using Ableton as a prepared DAW. Now, obviously, other DAWs bring, things to the table, but what was it specifically about Ableton Live that kind of elevated it beyond other DAWs like Logic or Pro Tools or whatever?
That's a great question, and I will be digging into this in your workshop for sure. But when you first open up a new session in Ableton Live, it's in session view. And if you've worked in a DAW before, you're going to go, oh, that looks like the mix window in Pro Tools. And it is. Like, it has faders, and it has the sends and returns and a pan pot and all that stuff. But it also has clip slots within the tracks. And this is where I built all of my live performance sets, where I would be able to either loop or trigger pre-made clips that I had worked on, or use it to trigger like automation for my vocal effects. I used it to trigger lights and movie clips using was it Resolume? Is that the I got into like the mapping stuff for a while. But all of that you could trigger within the session view in Ableton Live. And I was like, this is incredible, right? And you could use it to automate your patch changes on your keyboard. So I like did all this cool stuff. And then I realized that from a compositional standpoint, you could basically mix and match these things. And on a podcast, this is very difficult to talk about because it's a very visual interface. And that's what really drew me to it. Was it's like, okay, this bass line that I have in track 1, I have 3 different ideas for this bass line. And then in my other track 2, I have 3 different melodies. And I can like mix and match these and see which ones I like better on the fly. And I can record it into arrangement view, which I got to much later. But it just really allowed me this sort of flexibility to be playful, but not stuck on a timeline. And I think as composers, we're always stuck on a timeline, right? You open up a new session and you're like, I have to make a cue, and they're usually a minute and a half or 2 minutes long. And you're like, I need an intro, middle section, and an end, right? And a stinger on the end. And so that your brain is kind of locked into this format. And maybe, I don't know, it just, there's so much more playfulness, I think, when you are allowed to just play with sound until you find something that you really like. And then when you find something that you like, easily lock it into a timeline from session view. So session view is the thing that makes Ableton Live very different from all the other DAWs.
So it creates a non-linear, almost a performance atmosphere that can then be translated into a linear type of a format.
Yes. And I think of it as like if you've ever been in a flow state before, which hopefully you have, when it's good, like when things are going good, because I know like creativity is painful. Sometimes it's like torturous. It's like, oh, this is so hard. But I like to close the laptop or the computer and pull out the push, which I have full control over all
and
my
what you mean,
samples.
just for our listeners, the pushes, that's the Ableton Live
controller.
Controller, right?
Yes. And really, it doesn't have to be a push. It can be a launch pad or just I have a Arteria Key Lab. I have a Kai MP, whatever, 60, whatever. Like I have a graveyard of these things and they all have like faders and knobs and pads and keys. And honestly, you can use this guy. This is your QWERTY keyboard. You can actually MIDI map everything in Session View to one of these. So like you can turn anything into a MIDI controller, right? With the idea being that like, I'm not going to look at the screen while I'm doing this because when you're looking at the screen, you're locked in. It's a very different experience, right? Like when you're listening to a mix and you're looking at it versus, why do we do that? Why do we look at the screen when we listen to a mix? Doesn't make any sense, right? So you're getting your flow state with a push or whatever MIDI controller, and then you're actually fully present in that moment of creation, as opposed to being like, I'm going to get my mouse now and I'm going to click this over here. I'm going to lower this EQ band, or I'm going to automate the volume. It's not, you can do all that on the push, by the way. To be revealed, but it is it allows you to get into that flow state, which is magical, which is the reason I got into music in the first place, right? And then sometimes that work, the drudgery of composition and a timeline and a deadline, it's like, this is no longer fun,
right? Yeah, it reminds me of one of the ways that I create melody is through improvisation, and that kind of, I draw my jazz background and my degree and all of that. And I realize that when I'm crafting melody, I just try things over and over and over and over. It's not like I open up the DAW and look at notation view and meticulously like plan note for note. It's a lot of play, and it becomes this non-linear, amorphous blob of creativity that then just kind of slowly kind of takes shape through experimentation and through play. And so it sounds like you're doing that just on a DAW level, not just, crafting a single hook or a melodic motif.
Yeah, it's experimentation. It's definitely the improvisational aspect of it is huge. And if you don't play an instrument that well, which many composers don't, right? The push, because there's so many pads on it and they're MPE compatible. They have aftertouch and sensitivity that you can set up. And you can use scale mode. So any scale you can think of. There are scales in there that I've never heard of, and I studied composition. So you can improvise on a scale. You can change from, Lydian to Locrian, and you don't have to worry about what's the right note for the scale. You just play and have fun. So there's a little bit of it kind of levels the playing field a little bit there for folks that maybe aren't classically trained, because I think everybody has a musician inside of them, and you don't need to study jazz theory to be able to jam in Dorian mode. It's fine.
Yeah, completely agreed. It's just a matter of using the tools that you have at your disposal so that you can unlock a creative part about your process. So no, I think it's fantastic. Now, all this having been said, how has the implementation of something like using Ableton, which is not necessarily the industry standard, I would say, for a medium like film music or TV music, which is, kind of one of the things that we really focus on here at 52 Qs, is music for media, specifically production music. Do you have to switch over to another DAW, or what kind of challenges did you overcome using Ableton Live in that aspect?
It's interesting. There's so many stereotypes about Ableton Live
that I'm inadvertently propagating.
No, it's good though. It's good though, because I think the first one was that it's for electronic music only, and it's like techno, like boots and cats all day long.
Right.
And then the other is that you can't score to video. And I understand this because when Ableton Live first came out, it was really just a live looper, and then it became a tool that DJs used. So it did kind of like get a little bit of a stereotype. But since Live 11 came out, and really before that, but with the addition of all of like the new features, including like playlist comping and having a second window or 3 windows available for video editing, all these things are like relatively, I mean, they've been around, I guess, for several years in my mind, right? But I guess that's where the stereotype comes from, the DJ culture. But no, you do not have to switch to a second DAW. In fact, one of the coolest things I think about Ableton Live is the ability to just sound design on the spot without having to use a different sample editor. And this is one of the things that I've been digging into lately, and we'll be presenting in your workshop, is like, how do you do sound design within the software in a way that allows you to effortlessly, score to picture or score to TV, with it all being within devices and plugins that come with Ableton Live. So simpler and sampler and the drum rack, and then all of the effects racks and the macro routing capabilities. It's like you can watch that film in Ableton Live and just be basically sound designing live to picture. So there's no barrier there. And all of the work that I've done for television, for production music, has been in Ableton Live, and I've actually converted some other people to using it too.
You're an evangelist.
I mean, you'll see. Just wait. Yeah, the sound editing, I think, when you get down to the sample level, like in Simpler, the top window of the push allows you to sort of control the start and end and the fade ins and the fade outs with your hands, not using a mouse, which is beautiful, I think, because I just get so sick of mouse clicks. It's a little carpal tunnel all the time. But yeah, it's just really sort of, it's like playing a real instrument, I guess, is what really I'm trying to say.
No, that makes
instead of a computer. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. So tell us a little bit about maybe some of the other technology, because I know that one of the things that you firmly believe in is using technology and expanding creativity through technology. Have you found other uses of technology outside of Ableton Live that have kind of unlocked new things for you?
Outside of Ableton Live? There's nothing outside. I'm just kidding. I spend so much of my headspace in there. So Max for Live, I don't know if you're familiar with Max.
I'm not.
I don't know if that's what you're getting at. Cycling 74 is the company that developed Max, and it's a graphic user interface that allows you to create any kind of plugin that works seamlessly within Ableton Live.
Gotcha.
And I'll go into this in your workshop too, but this is there's a community of people, maxforlive.com, that create these plugins, and they're all super creative. And most of them are free. And there are also developers that will charge a fee to purchase the plugin, just like any third party company or whatever. But I found that most of the Max for Live devices are extremely creative and aleatoric. There's a lot of chants that I've been playing with lately, a lot of plugins that are allow you to sort of play with the randomness of sound and like rolling the dice and the buffer shuffler, right? The idea that there's one pack that I really love that's called Inspired by Nature, and one of the devices is called Bouncy Notes, and it's like, it looks like an old Atari video game, but basically you can control like the gravity and the mass of these balls that are bouncing, and the balls will trigger the MIDI that triggers the sample that you've built. And it's a really fun game to play, and I've lost many hours of my life doing that. And there's another one called Tree Tone that just generates resonant frequencies based on a random algorithm that draws a tree as it's going, and it never creates the same pattern twice, which I think is beautiful because nature is random, and it's pulling from that idea.
Yeah, Max for Live came out after I had kind of switched over into the Logic slipstream, and I never was able to get my brain around it. But just having talked to you, outside of this, I feel like, man, maybe I need to book some lessons just with you, some one-on-ones. But it reminds me of, and forgive me, I'm got to nerd out here. I play World of Warcraft, right? And you can, and other games do this as well. You can have add-ons, which can affect the user interface, can affect the functionality. It doesn't like change the core gameplay, but it allows you to modify the game in a way that connects with you, whether it's like I said, a visual indicator or a sound indicator or something like that. Am I getting my brain around? Is that kind of what we have, like add-ons?
Absolutely. Yes, it's an add-on, totally. Like somebody was like, hey, I play the drums and I want my, my stick every time it hits the drum. I want that to control the tempo in Ableton Live instead of Ableton Live controlling the tempo. So now there's a Max for Live device that will follow your drummer instead of the other way around, which when I was touring and performing, I sent a click track to the drummer. Well, now the drummer's in charge. Like who would give that control to the drummer? Like that's crazy.
Which is funny because as a drummer, I was always called to use Ableton to fire the loops because I would run the loop rig on a laptop, usually with backing tracks, whether it's theater stuff or a ton of church stuff. Which is why I still had Ableton and still do to run live loops and live backing tracks for church.
Yep, it's a very big market there that I will not touch. I mean, all the big touring artists are using Ableton Live for their playback for sure, because it allows you so much control over everything, including your headphone mix and things that you haven't thought about. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I want to circle around to something that we talked about in getting ready for our chat today. And this is a term that you use that I hadn't heard before, and you call it micro creativity. Can you explain the concept of micro creativity?
Totally made up concept. And it can tie it into this Max for Live thing because like you, I had no idea what Max for Live was. I avoided it like the plague. Every time it launched on my computer, I was like, oh no, shut it down. It's terrible. I don't want this up. I don't know what it is. Actually, it wasn't until I went through the certification process with Ableton, they forced me to do presentations on Max for Live, and I had to build my own device. So I went this simple route of building a device that degraded your sample rate and bit depth. But yeah, getting back to the original question, which was just ask it one more time for the listeners.
Yeah, for the listeners.
For the listeners.
Micro creativity. I've heard you talk about it.
Yes, yeah. So I would basically take a Max for Live device or anything in Ableton Live that I didn't know what it was, like a Corpus or a Tension. There's all these cool devices that I had no idea what they're doing, and just spend 20, 30 minutes with it and just playing with it without reading the manual. I never read the manual.
Read the manual.
Let's see what this does.
Exactly. What's the fun and exploration in that, right?
Right, but the sense of micro creativity coming from just taking a small thing, on a micro level that you've never done before, that terrifies you, and playing with it, and taking away from that experience the good thing that happened, right? Oh, I didn't know that when I turn this dial to the right, it would make this happen, right? So you get a cool new idea out of having tried something very, very small, right? And then you can apply all those things together. And a lot of this is sort of born out of my desire to, find a voice as a composer, right? To find a sound and to figure out, like, how did Debussy do this? How did Chopin do this? Because they developed these amazing compositional styles that were really unique to them, right? And I've always wondered, how do they do that? And to me, that's micro creativity, is just exploring those tiny little
and that
things.
takes no small amount of courage and faith in your own process, don't you think?
I mean, there's been a lot of nights that I've come in from the studio raging, like yelling and screaming and like, I'll never amount to anything. This is stupid. I'm quitting music forever. Which is basically every night. But that goes hand in hand with being a creative individual trying to make a living with your output. It's temperamental, right?
Yeah, but yeah, I think there's a certain amount of bravery it takes, to kind of push into something new and which can be a real challenge, especially as production music composers. We're always thinking about, how can we use this? Is the client going to like it? Is it editor friendly? And so a lot of times, let's see how to say this without sounding like heretical. A lot of times creativity, I don't want to say it takes a backseat, but how creative or original something isn't necessarily the first thought. Is that okay?
Yes.
I'm waiting.
No. I was actually going to bring this up.
Yeah, I'm waiting for the police to swoop in through the windows.
So when I first got into library music, I had no idea what I was doing. And the folks at Warner Brothers were like, you got to put your artist hat away. And like, you're just doing library music. You are not, the artist part of you has got to die. Right. And, this is years ago at this point. And now I've worked for Warner Brothers, like we're in the company. And now I have producers and music supervisors coming to me and saying, hey, Christina, I know that you're a musician and a composer. Can you help me find some production music that's a little bit more creative? All the stuff that we have in this library, not to be named library, is kind of boring and dull. And we need something with something fresh and new. And like, it all sounds the same. And it's also predictable. And I'm going, well, do I? Let me tell you. And I think that, I don't know, there's something to be challenged there, because I know that production music can still be creative, and it will stand out if it's creative, because even if it's background music for a show or a commercial, the person that is putting their heart and soul into making whatever it is they're making, the producers, they want the music to be amazing.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't have the budget to pay for a commercial artist. So a lot of times they're like, okay, well, I have to go with library or stock music, and it's going to cost, $250 as opposed to $200,000 or $250,000. So I guess I have to settle for this, so there's a weird thing that's happened with production music where it's like, oh, this is what they want because this is what they've always had. But then the producer's like, oh, I guess I have to get this because this is what production composers make. So it's like the seesaw that goes back and forth. And I think in reality that everybody wants more creative voices and music in their projects, whether it's an ad or if it's a TV show.
Yeah, it can be little bit though, like a snake eating its own tail though, because on one hand, they keep asking for the same type of a thing, because a lot of times they keep making the same types of shows that call for the same types of musical cues. But how do you balance pushing creativity and pushing into new territory, and yet still giving them something that they need or that the genre or style calls for?
That's a great question. And I think for production music, it's a balance. And it's like when I work on music for artists, right? If they're an electronic artist or I'm an electronic artist, I always try to have at least one organic acoustic thing in that mix, so it's not all purely digital. And I think with production music, it's like if you can add one little salt, pepper, something, right, that sets it apart and is maybe a little bit different, but not so different that it takes away from the picture that it's being synced to, then you might have a chance to stand out a little bit. Because I mean, the tracks in the libraries are like, I know you've been through them. I know you have music in them, and you just scroll down and click through everything, and it's very uniform. So just having that one tiny little addition, like, what is that saying about throwing the baby out with the bathwater? I hate it.
Yeah, well, it's like, I need to dump out this bathwater, and there's a baby in it, but
Yeah, I mean, like, keep the baby in there. Just maybe like get a new soap.
Or a bigger bin, or maybe just, I mean,
I'm telling you from the horse's mouth, the producers are like, we need something new and fresh. They don't mean, oh, give me something insane and crazy and little bings and boops and bleeps and blops. Like, no, they still want a track that sounds like what they're used to. They just want it to sound modern, right? So if there's something that's trending in commercial music right now, like you could think of an example, I'm sure, right? Like, do you want to think of one?
Well, looking and seeing what Mac Quayle has done with his, Mr. Robot score, that seems to like be an aesthetic which is kind of reverberating through, all of the production music.
Sure. Then, like White Lotus. So HBO is now part of Warner Brothers.
Right.
So White Lotus is another good example, because the vocal stylings in the theme song are now starting to show up in a lot of other, production music. But what if that's kind of a copycat thing, right? Where you're like, oh, this was successful for this other commercial endeavor, but how do you copy that, but then kind of make it your own, where it's reminiscent of and familiar of this new vibe? I don't know. I think there's like a middle ground in there for sure.
Well, I think it's about iteration, not imitation.
Yes. Yes. And I will say, if you continue to make the same tracks over and over again for eternity until you die, like that, nobody's going to want to, I don't know, you're not going to like yourself. And
Well, it stops being very rewarding.
It's not rewarding. Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, we're all in it for the money, right?
Yeah. I want to be able to make a living making music.
I do too.
And it's such a balance, and it can be so challenging, whether it's doing commercials or whether it's I do a ton of sports broadcasting, and hearing, what's getting put on air versus what I am doing, and trying to thread that needle of pushing things forward, giving them something new. And again, and I think you might have answered this, do they keep using the same type of sound because that's all that's available? Or is it because they're fundamentally creatures of habit and that's safe? That's like a nice warm blanket or a worn pair of jeans, which they know is going to fit. So they keep putting their legs into those pants and not something new. I don't know, my metaphors got weird.
I don't know, Dave. I think TikTok is just going to change everything.
Oh, I hope not. I do not want to be a TikTok star.
Well, I think it's the music industry and what people consume is always changing, and that fear of the new comes from, the networks they're like, well, we like this, but we don't want to scare our demographic, right? And I think that has a lot to do with it too, because as we move from a purely broadcast medium like linear broadcast television, where people are watching it on a timeline and it's coming through their TV, versus streaming, right? And we can talk about streaming royalties all day, versus user generated content, which is a huge growing field right now, right? Where there's record labels are signing bands based on one TikTok song that went viral just to get a piece of their licensing and then dropping them 8 months later. So, the industry itself is changing. And I think that a lot of those decisions are guided by the demographic of whoever has been historically watching that service, right? And I think as composers if you're writing for production libraries or for television at all in general, those are who you're slave to that demographic, right? And so when that demographic shifts and changes, right, then we have a new audience, and young people like exciting creative things, right? I know that I work on a lot of HGTV stuff, and it's funny because it's like our demographic is like middle-aged housewives and gay men. But their music is all like pretty conservative, pretty standard, but I know a lot of really eccentric gay men that would love it if they would use different music on those shows instead of like the same stuff over and over again. So I don't know. I think it's a chicken or the egg question, but
yeah, we saw that, in the golf broadcast over on CBS, where, there's a sound to golf, it's like, hey, it's a long par 5, and the golf clap and, the little birds in the background. And then we noticed, we noticed a few years ago that like hip hop started showing up in the broadcasts because there was a change somewhere. This is my understanding. There was a change kind of in a supervisor position, and the person was younger, realized that the prominent golfers weren't like the old guard, right? They weren't the kind of the paunchy, little Argyle wearing, poofy hat white dudes necessarily. They were young, athletic, golfers of all nationalities, and they listened to hip hop. And so suddenly we started hearing that in the broadcasts. And so we had to shift with that, and we had to start providing golf. Now hip hop. Now it wasn't, the same hip hop you would find over on football or in basketball, but it was hip hop nonetheless. And so that was an example of the demographic kind of shifting and the music shifting with it.
Well, you hit the nail on the head there, because hate to say it, it is a bunch of old white dudes that run all of the networks and control all the money. And I think as that tide shifts, it's going to take many, many more years for that to happen. But like this golf example is kind of the perfect example. It's like, hey, we have more people to represent than just, and the same thing in classical music. My God, it was like, there wasn't a single female composer or anybody that wasn't from like Germany or Austria in the required repertoire when I was in school for music. Like I had to like special order scores from Europe that were handwritten, right? Like that were like photocopies written in, you know, languages I didn't understand in order to get music that wasn't part of the accepted canon. It's
yeah,
like,
I remember in music school there were two female composers. There was Hildegard, and then there was
Hildegard van Bingen with
and it was like, look, a woman, can you believe it? And then there was Clara Schumann, right? That was it.
Yes, and Clara Schumann also, I've performed some of her music. She also like took care of Robert Schumann's 9 children. He was insane and died very young. And she edited all of his scores.
Yep.
Don't get me started, because
also another certified badass.
Total badass. Writing her own music, wasn't allowed to publish it in her time because women couldn't publish music in the 1800s. What? I wonder why things are the way they are.
Well, and that leads us back to, you know, you are one of, I believe, 25 women certified Ableton live trainers. And I just want to quantify, I don't personally subscribe to using woman or female as an adjective, right? Just like I'm not like a male Logic user. I think that's weird, but
you're a male production music composer.
Look at me. I'm a male composer.
You're a male professor.
Right, exactly. Jeez. But but that having been said, I mean, you are, you know, you are in rare company as far as the number of women who go down the path of production, let alone something like Ableton, because it's just it seems to be the just EDM dudes, you know, that's the kind of the stereotype, if you will. But what has to change, or where can we go? How can we push that forward?
The eternal sausage fest. I mean, I'm working on that. I am actually wearing a FemHouse shirt. Nice. I met these wonderful folks through Ableton. They hooked me up with a lot of people, and I'll travel and do workshops. And they did, you know, they provide basically free workshops for women and sort of, you know, non-gender conforming individuals in a safe space. It's a nonprofit. And I think what they're doing is wonderful. They're really leading, because people ask me this question all the time. Why aren't there more women composers? And I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. And that's a whole other podcast. There's a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest ones is a lack of role models, right? Lack of female role models in the industry, especially when it comes to being music producers, right? We don't have women that are showing up in the Grammys winning a Record of the Year, producer for Record of the Year, right? And if you go down the stats, like most of the songwriters are men, all the mixing and mixing assistants and mastering people are all male, even when it might be a female fronted act, right? So there's a lack of role models doing it. And the reason there's a lack of role models kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier, like Clara Schumann, right? Like pre-birth control, what happens if you get pregnant, you know, and you start raising children, right? You get married at a young age and you are sort of relegated to that. And it wasn't until the 50s and 60s that women were starting to enter the workforce. By then, we have a whole history of men as composers, right? Yeah. I studied music history. I studied the history of men composing music, right? Why were women not involved in composing music? Well, they were at home taking care of the babies while the men were out doing the composing, right? So it's a long history. I spent most of my college years studying this, trying to figure this out and answer it for myself. And it's definitely complicated. But on the hopeful side, there are so many young women right now that are excited about it. and are getting into it. And it's one of my passions, is finding those women and like giving them a safe space to ask questions, because it's really scary when I went to the Ableton Leap conference in 2018 by myself. I flew out to LA. I wasn't a certified trainer yet, just was like, I want to go to this. And I remember walking into that auditorium and like every head like turned around and was like, who's she? Because I was the only girl. I was the only female in an auditorium over 1,000 people. And I was like, oh, it's worse than I thought.
I'm like, I knew it was bad, but maybe not this bad.
It's pretty scary. Yeah. And then, you know, some other stuff happened, but like, it's terrifying. It's like, imagine walking. I mean, Dave, just you walk into a room, there's 100 women, right? And you sit down in the back and they're all chatting. They all kind of know each other. And the person that's presenting is also a female. And they're cracking female jokes.
Right.
And you're like, what time is it? Am I at the right conference? Because I don't really feel comfortable right now. Like, it's weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I've gotten over it. Clearly.
Well, I think it goes without saying. I appreciate that you are being that role model, you know, and I don't take for granted how, you know, growing up, I had no shortage of role models that I could imitate, or I could strive to be like. And so I appreciate you, and I'm glad that you're speaking out, talking about the things. I also am glad that it's not like you're just fearlessly going into there. Like I have a hard time imagining going into a room full of 1,000 people.
I mean, I was nervous. Like,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. I'm still always nervous, you know, and I'm scared. Even when I, you know, started teaching at the college here, all the professors were dudes. 98% of the class people, the students were dudes. And, you know, I was always a little nervous, but it's, you know, I think that's okay.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you. It's we don't really realize how many glass ceilings are just still all over every part of all these industries, you know, and so it takes folks just like you fearlessly punching through them and helping to at least carve a few panes of glass out so that others can come behind you. So I appreciate
It's like what you said, you know, if I can do it, you can do it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You just got to see somebody doing it.
The last thing I want to talk about, we've talked about and we've mentioned you being an Ableton certified trainer. Can you talk a little bit about what that means and what that process was like for you?
Yeah, it was about a 10-year process. No, I'm not joking, because I think when I got certified in 2020, I think Mari Sullivan and I were like number 2 and 3. So Laura Escade was the very first ever certified trainer, right? So the first Ableton certified trainer was a woman. Then there were 300 dudes. And then it was... So like, I think I found out about her and I was like, ooh. And then I was too nervous to contact her because I was like, she's scary, intimidating, because she's awesome. But the process was a long, long time coming. And I'll be honest, like I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to get into it. It's not like, you know, Avid, where if you want to become an Avid certified instructor, you just apply and you can go through it.
And you take a bunch of tests and there you go.
Right. So this was like a long drawn out process where it wasn't until I started teaching at the university that I met Thomas Fault, who was the brand manager from Chicago, and he wanted to come down and do a user group. We have an Ableton user group here in town. And then he asked me to present and I presented, and, you know, that was the first sort of initial, and this is after many, many years of me trying to figure out how to do it, who to reach at the company and like how to apply. And it was through me reaching out that I got connected with him. This is a very convoluted story, but because it took a long time. So I built the user group, and then the next thing I did was, you know, Thomas I think he sort of nominated me, and then I had to apply, and then I had to go through several interviews with these guys in Germany that, you know, clearly English wasn't their first language. And at the time I didn't know how to use Zoom. And so the first interview was like Zoom. So I was literally holding my phone in my hand, flipped around, trying to get the camera angle right to answer their questions. And they did a round of questions about technology. Then they did a round of questions about production and like sample rate and anything you could think of that has to do with sound production.
Sure.
And then they did a whole interview about music theory, asking questions. And then there was like a test. That was before I ever met anybody in person. And then like a year later, I flew out to LA and I had to present in front of the guys that, very scary German men, we'll just say it that way, which is, again, was another experience where it was just like, great, more dudes. So yeah, it was kind of a long drawn out process. I think, you have to establish yourself as a performer and an educator. You have to be kind of a ninja. Like, okay, this person has used this successfully on stage. I had taken my performing career to as far as I could on my own, right? Like we played over 500 shows. It culminated in playing Bonnaroo, and then we did, it was like, that was it. And I was like, I'm retiring. So I did that, and then I went to the college and started teaching. So it was a culmination of those two realms that sort of qualified me for the application. So I think by the time you kind of if you get that far in there, you've been on the radar for a while, because they do it once a year, if sometimes once every 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And I happened to catch the one that was in LA. And it was a small group of people. It was like 5 or 6 people. And then it was Korea, and then it was Tokyo, and then, it's international. So
yeah, when you could go onto the Ableton website and there's, there you are. And there's a reason that they put you on the website. It's almost like you're an Ableton ambassador almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, you're again, you didn't just sign up for tests at a community college and then take the test and you get something you get to stick on your resume. It's not like that. It's not what this is about.
No, it was one of the most intense, gut-wrenching experiences of my life. I learned so much through it all, though, because you do have to develop some confidence in your skills, which I think we all have a little bit of imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So, it was definitely an experience. It's the thing that I'm the most proud of, I'll be honest, in my whole life, because I love it. Also, I don't get any commissions. Like, I'm not selling the software. Like, the company as a whole doesn't really advertise or promote. I don't get any commissions. I am not making any kickbacks or, nothing. So my passion for Ableton Live is purely what it is. Yeah. And I've also taught Pro Tools, and I'm certified, and I'm an Avid certified instructor too. So I'm familiar with all the other DAWs as well. So
no, well, one of the main reasons I really wanted you on is, first of all, just my latent curiosity in Ableton, having, it's like, it's like the girl I brought to the high school dance, and then I went off and went to college, and, I had this whole other life. And I remember like, oh man, Ableton. Oh yeah. We had good times, didn't we? And so I wanted to hear from someone who's using it professionally, who's using it well beyond anything I ever did, and who is using it in the industry that we're talking about here, which is also, for you listeners, you eagle-eared listeners may have heard us talk about the workshop here coming up on February 27th. It is at 5 p.m. Eastern time, and Christina is going to be giving a workshop on unlocking creativity, specifically using Ableton Live, and talking more about Max for Live. That is a feature that is available for our friends and family subscribers of 52Qs. But Christina, tell us a little bit about the workshop and some of the things we can expect to go over there.
Sure. I'm really trying to gauge it for your audience, and I'm familiar because I have listened to all your podcasts, and I'm a 52Qs member now. Yep. Thank you for bringing me into your world. Absolutely. So, I know I write production music. I have a lot of music in the Warner Brothers ecosystem, and it was all done in Ableton Live. And I find that even if it's production music, I still run out of ideas for bass lines, melodies, and drum beats and things and even sounds. Like, our sound palettes get stale, right? I have thousands of packs and sample libraries, and I'm like, God, I've used all this. I want something different. I like to learn. I love learning. So I think the workshop is really going to be like, okay, so maybe you haven't thought about music in this way, and here's a way that you can do something new that you probably wouldn't have come up with on your own. So we're going to look at Simpler, which is the sample editing feature. We're going to learn how to kind of jam and play around with sounds in session view, and how easy it is to make a 3-minute track or a 1.5-minute cue very quickly, right? And then being able to save that and use it in future productions, templates, right? If you're a fan of making templates, I'm love-hate relationship with templates.
Right on. Yeah, boy, do I get that.
Yeah. And then Max for Live sort of as an aleatoric device being, what if I introduce some chants, right? Because for instance, I am not a drummer and I can grab loops and samples all day, which I try not to ever use like drum loops or things like that in my productions. I can do simple kick and snare pattern all day long, but the auxiliary percussion eludes me, right? So what if I use some chants in my composition to come up with hi-hat patterns and other things that are going to bring this drum beat to life and aren't going to feel like somebody clicked it in with a MIDI controller, like, or with a mouse, like, here's a hi-hat here and let's put the velocity at 99 and then I'll make another hi-hat here at 97. It'll be great. Like, what if we introduce chants to the velocity? What if we use a Max for Live device to randomize that chant? So things like that are going to maybe make composing more fun. That's it. It's fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Christina, I just want to thank you for taking some time out and chatting with me, and thank you for the workshop coming up. Once again, that is February 27th at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, and that is available to our friends and family subscribers. You can head over to 52cues.com and sign up today. In the meantime, where can folks learn more about you?
Sure. So you can find me on Instagram at Ableton Christina. You can always hit me up in my DMs and you can email me. I don't care. I will email you back. Ableton Christina at Gmail. It's super official. All of my production music is up on pitchwirestudio.com. If you're curious to see what kind of work that I do there. And Hot Lights will be actually, Warner Brothers is going to be releasing Hot Lights. I did a lot of full-length albums for the production music library at Warner Brothers, and we're going to actually be releasing one of those albums here in the next 2 months. So I'm real excited about that because that was production music, but it's music that I like. It's pop and it's full-length songs. They're way more longer than a cue. So.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that. We'll have links to all of that in the description or in the show notes. But Christina, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Dave. Your stuff is awesome. Oh. I could have figured out a better way to say that. Your stuff is awesome.
Once again, a huge word of thanks to Christina for joining me today on the podcast, and I am so looking forward to her workshop on February 27th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time, where she's going to be opening up Ableton and showing the DAW and showing how she uses Max for Live to really unlock her creativity. So really looking forward to that. Once again, that is a feature that is available, and the workshop is available for our friends and family subscribers. And if you're interested in that, then you definitely want to stick around, because we're about to have Mrs. 52 Cues, Shannon Croft, who's going to tell us all about the community. But when we return, we are going to be checking out an epic hybrid trailer cue written by 52 Cues community member Marc Alan.
Hey y'all, I'm Shannon Croft, and I want to tell you that the 52 Cues podcast is made possible by viewers and listeners just like you, composers and producers who are looking for a better way to connect and collaborate. You see, 52 Cues isn't just another website selling static, pre-recorded videos to a mass audience. It's a fun, vibrant, and positive community that comes together online for sharing cues, getting feedback, and discussing what's up in the production music industry. You'll find both personalized feedback and live interaction, which are the best and fastest ways to grow your skills and earn more placements. The best part is that the 52 Cues community is absolutely free. And when you're ready to take your career to the next level, we offer friends and family subscriptions, which unlock weekly live streams, live interactive group feedback sessions, monthly interactive workshops, and more. Head over to 52cues.com and sign up today. And while you're there, check out our personalized feedback videos, private lessons, and of course, merch. I can't wait to see you at 52cues.com.
right, that was Crimson by Marc Alan. Marc, thank you so much for sending this along. This was sent during our week 6 weekly feedback thread, so I appreciate you sending this along. A lot to really love about this cue. Love me a good trailer cue, and you've done a really good job with your edit points. So like if we were to look at this, you know, an editor would easily be able to see where they could chop this up and where they could use it. Love the opening here. Love how we're already hinting at this theme. And I feel like we've done a really good job with that theme. It's really, really memorable, and I think it works very, very well. That having been said, I feel like we kind of lost the theme here towards the end, and it doesn't really feel like, here's our primary theme. Bum, 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 bum. But later in the cue, let's see. Bum, bum. I feel like through here we could have been implying this a little bit. Maybe this is transitional, but definitely by this last dun 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 dun. I feel like we should be like hitting it smack and bring that primary theme back, because I feel like we kind of lost the thread on that. Also, this is really loud. And I know it's a trailer, and trailers are allowed to be loud, but it's really, really loud, and we're getting into what I call flat topping, which is where the compressor really crushes in and it starts squashing these upper transients. And so in Logic, you know, when you kind of push them all together, it creates this kind of flat top look where all the transients are really kicking up. And so it could just be just a gain issue, but even if I kind of pull the gain down, you can see how we're flat topping. So, and I think part of the issue is the drums are pretty aggressive, and I think they might be a little overly aggressive. I'll set that back to 0. I think they might be a little overly aggressive and a little overly transient, and they're just kind of smacky. I love the edits. I love the edit points here, and I like the chop right there. Love these sounds. Love the distortion. I think it's fantastic. I mean, this really is hybrid in every sense of the term. By the end here, I feel like, I feel like the mix is a little, I don't know, I feel like it's a little top heavy and we lose some of the low end. And I'm not suggesting an EQ curve like this, but I think it overall could use kind of a shift where we bring more of the highs and less of the less of the highs and more of the low. I'm trying to create an EQ curve here, and there we go. Yeah, I'm using the Fab filter here, and so I'm not suggesting an EQ curve like this, but I feel like we need to bring some of the highs down and bring some of the lows up, because we're like some of the 150 to 50 hertz or so is kind of lost. Little muddy through here. Lots of energy up here, but just a little muddy throughout here. And so I think shifting up that low end, bringing the highs down. I think that's probably the first The first thing to do is to bring the highs down. Don't just go boosting things. I think we bring the highs down, bring the volume of our percussion down a little bit, so we're not like all these transients pushing into the limiter and into the compressor. And then maybe add a sub bass or something. Don't try to EQ your bass instrument to try to coax those super low ends. There just seems to be just not clearly defined low end. So if we're so we're in A, we're going to be in A. Right, so the fundamental of A is the 440, so the 220 or the 110 or the 55 hertz or so. That's that 55 hertz range is where I feel like not clearly defined. Right now it's all rumbly drums as opposed to the actual pitch of that A, that 55 or the 110. Let's look at 110. Let me see if I can't really isolate this. All right, so that's 110. Here's 55 hertz. This is going to be about that's about as low as you want that to go. Anything below that, I mean, obviously you can't do like 22.5 hertz. That's just going to be just rumble. And so, but from a songwriting perspective, I think this is all working really well, and love all of the I like the percussion parts, love all the editing, love the trailer structure. So I think it's working. For me, it's more about the mix notes, and probably also need a better title. Crimson, unless that's for a specific project. I like the word crimson. I think that works really well, but it just doesn't really communicate what this is about. Maybe like Crimson, I don't know, Crimson Assault, or Crimson Crimson Assault. That's all I got for you. But this is all working, and I think it does a really good job. Just needs some mix notes and some balancing. Pull that overall loudness down. I wouldn't shoot for anything really much louder than minus 12 to minus 10 LUFS max, and make sure that our peaks aren't cresting over. That might be here. That might be me doing that. But those are my thoughts for you. And once again, this was sent along during our week 6 feedback threads. We post these feedback threads every single week. And why don't you join us? Why don't you come over to 52cues.com and join our weekly feedback? We're in the middle of collecting cues for week 7. And every week I pick a cue from these submissions to feature here on the podcast. But if this is something that you enjoyed and you think would be helpful for your own cues, then head over to 52cues.com/coaching and you can get your own you can book a private one-on-one session, or you could get a 15-minute HD MP4 video of a complete breakdown of your cue, where I look at things like title, mix, structure, form, harmony, melody, instrument choice, EQing, all of that. Again, head over to 52cues.com/coaching. And while you're there, again, you can check out my one-on-one Zoom sessions or be put on the mailing list and be the first to find out when we open up registration for our spring mastermind group. So that's going to do it for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. And you definitely want to tune in next week, where I am going to talk about all things metadata. One of the least sexiest parts of this whole gig, which is filling out metadata, descriptions, titles, keywords, moods, emotions, genres, all of those things. They're more important than maybe you think, because we have to keep in mind that before an editor or a music supervisor ever listens to our track, they're going to see our cue show up in their search results, which means things like title and descriptions and keywords might be more important than the cue itself. So you definitely want to stick around for that. And again, a huge word of thanks to the family, friends, and patrons of 52Qs who help keep things going. If that's something that you're interested in, head over to 52qs.com and sign up. We would love to have you. But again, that's going to do it for me. I hope that your week 6 was fantastic, and I know that you're going to have a fantastic week 7. How do I know that, friends? Because I know and believe and trust that the universe has amazing plans just for you. Until next time, peace. The 52Qs podcast is copyright 2023 at 18 Studios, all rights reserved. The music played on the podcast is copyright of their respective owners and is used with permission and for educational purposes only. For more information, including joining the community and submitting your cue for consideration on the podcast, head over to 52qs.com.